This lesson is focusing on how to analyse a non-fiction text, how to analyse a single non-fiction text as opposed to comparative analysis. I'm going to look at the language and structural features that you need to focus on, the types of questions and what's required by them, and how to respond effectively when you are analysing a non-fiction text in response to question 3 on paper 2. So we'll begin with the question. Question 3 on paper 2 will always require you to analyse the use of language and structure across the whole of text 1, that is the first non-fiction text that you've been dealing with in section A. There will be no specific site focus for this question. The question will always be quite open, and it is asking you to look at the way that language and structure has been used to make the text interesting to read. So this is where an understanding of SPAF, of subject, purpose, audience and form comes in, because what you're being asked to analyse is how the writer has adapted and made deliberate choices of language and structure to suit the needs of the audience, the purpose, the form, and how they're conveying their subject matter appropriately for those three features. Question 3 is worth 15 marks, and you have quite a lot of space to provide your response in. That means that you need to provide a detailed PED essay response. In that PED essay response, as with question 3 on paper 1, you must include comments on specific language and specific structural features to get beyond the halfway mark in the mark scheme. Okay, and as with paper 1, it doesn't matter how good and how detailed and how analytical your comments on language are. If there are no analytical comments on structure, you will not get more than half marks for that response. That is just a stipulation in the mark scheme. So do make sure that you are able to identify and comment analytically on some structural features. Right, what to look for in these non-fiction texts? Well, in terms of language features, you're going to need to look for rhetorical devices. I'm not going to list them all here. We've done that in other lessons. We've looked at all of these different rhetorical devices and what they do. There are loads of them. You need to know what they are. You need to know the terms. You need to be able to identify them. You also need to know which ones to expect given the purpose, because remember, each of the 5 purposes that you have in transactional writing are also the purposes that the non-fiction texts are written for in section A. So once you've identified the purpose, you kind of know what you're looking for in terms of language features. You may also be looking for figurative devices. These are most likely in the literary non-fiction text, because remember, one of these texts will always be a piece of literary non-fiction. But equally, you could find some figurative devices in media non-fiction text. So just because you're looking at a newspaper article or a web page, don't think that that means there can't be any figurative devices in there. There may well be, so just be alert to them, and if there are, it's probably worth commenting on them, because there may be a less usual feature of a media non-fiction text. Look for colloquialisms. Again, this is where you need to be clear about the SPAF, the subject, the purpose, the audience and the form of the text that you're dealing with, because quite a lot of these non-fiction texts, depending on the purpose and the form and equally the audience, will have a more informal tone and register, and that will be created through the inclusion of colloquial words, phrases, everyday idioms, those kinds of things. So look out for those as well, and again, they're probably worth commenting on if they're in there. In terms of structural features, again, there are lots of them, and we have looked at these in detail in other lessons, so do go back and revise those. But just to quickly recap some of the key ones, headlines and titles. If you're looking at an article or a report or something that has some form of headline or title, look at the way that is constructed, look at the language feature, because you can then write about it as a language and a structural feature. With articles, look at strap lines. This is the little sort of, it's usually just a sentence underneath the headline that sums up the writer's attitude towards their subject matter. And that is a convention of newspaper, magazine articles and also reviews. So look for strap lines. Look for the use of subheadings. We would expect these again in articles. We would also expect them in texts that are written to inform and to explain, to chunk the information, to make it clear, to signpost the reader through. Look for the use of bullet point lists. This is something that you might get in advice text, just to draw out the key points of advice. That again is worth commenting on, as long as you're commenting on it as a structural feature rather than as a presentational feature. So look at how it relates to the information being provided. Bullet point lists, numbered lists are often used to reiterate, to re-emphasise the key points that are being made. Look at the topic sentences. You should be able to get a sense of what a media non-fiction text is like simply by scanning and reading just the topic sentences. You should know what that text is about. Look at the connectives that are used in there, temporal, sequential, causal, whatever they might be. How is the reader being signposted? Does that help you to understand what the purpose is? And look at the relationship between the opening of that non-fiction text and the ending of it. How does the writer make it a cohesive text? How do they tie up all the loose ends? How do they resolve the thing that they introduced in that very opening sentence or paragraph in the very final one? Okay, so as with all of these, our starting point is the question. With the question on paper 2, the very first word tells you directly to analyse. Okay, so there is no ambiguity about this. There's no confusion about what you're being asked to do. You are told directly to analyse. And if that wasn't enough, they also include the word how. That is there to indicate that you are being asked to write about the effects of language and structural features, not just identify them. We then get this sort of key term in these questions reminding you to comment on language and structure. Remember, you must do that to get more than half marks. And then this term here, this is the wording of question 3, to interest and engage the readers. And that simply means, what deliberate choices has the writer of this text made to make it interesting and appealing to the intended audience, given the subject matter, given the purpose, and given the form? How are they making deliberate choices and consciously crafting their text to appeal to their readers? This question is worth 15 marks. You must provide a full PED essay, and that full PED essay must remain focused on the effects that the specific language and structural elements have in terms of making the text interesting. All right, so how do you respond to this? Now, I'm not going to run through an example because obviously you're dealing with a whole non-fiction text and you're providing a whole essay, so it would just be too long-winded to do that. But in general terms, you need to begin by establishing the SPAF of the text. You should have done that already when you were reading them in the 15-minute reading time, because that's going to tell you, that's going to indicate to you what particular language and structural features might possibly be in the text. So you've got a clue about what you're probably looking for. Once you've done that, work your way through the text logically. If you're dealing with something that's got a headline or a title, start there. What kind of language device has been used to craft that headline or that title? How does that headline or title set the tone for the text that's to come? Then go through, look at the strapline. Skim for obvious structural features, things like straplines and subheadings and bulleted and numbered lists. Look at their relationship to the headline and the purpose and the form of the text. Whenever you identify a language or a structural device, just read the sentence around it and think about why it is being used at that particular point in the text. How does it appeal to the audience? What relevance does it have to the audience? Is it there to emphasize a point? Is it there to pull at the heartstrings if they're using emotive language? Why are they using that particular device at that particular point? And make sure that every point you make is supported with a piece of textual evidence. Now, you can either quote directly, you can paraphrase a longer quote, or you can reference to things within the non-fiction text. Okay, so analysis of these non-fiction texts needs to focus on the way the writer's deliberate choices of language and structure make it interesting and appealing to the intended audience, given the subject matter, the purpose, and the form.